right now, there are billions of dollars moving at literal light speed to fund artificial intelligence infrastructure. I mean, the capital flies across the globe in milliseconds.
Yeah, it's almost instantaneous.
Right. But if you try to actually order a custom electrical transformer for a local grid to actually power those data centers,
Yeah.
you might be waiting like 3 to 4 years.
Which is an incredible bottleneck.
It is.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like light speed money is somehow creating real-world traffic jams.
Mm.
And, have you ever noticed that feeling? A lot seems to be happening in the world. Massive levers are being pulled, but nothing actually changes where you'd expect it to.
That is exactly the phenomenon we're looking at today.
Yeah, so to understand this very specific modern sensation, we were taking a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of source materials. We've got systems theory papers, global supply chain logistics reports, and some deep geopolitical analyses.
Yeah, our mission here isn't to look at the daily news and debate what is politically right or wrong. We aren't here to solve anything.
No, not at all.
Instead, it is to step back and just observe the underlying mechanics of a world where we are practically drowning in intent, but we're sort of starving for clear results.
Yeah, well said. Because we are looking at a pervasive structural shift, right? We see intense action at the highest levels of governance and finance, but that action just fails to translate into the phenomenon we expect.
Right. The expected outcome simply does not arrive in the shape we anticipated.
So let's break that down with some examples from the sources, because the details are really where this gets incredibly interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, take the massive structural economic sanctions applied to nations over the last few years. The general expectation, the stated intent, is that the target nation will be economically paralyzed. Like the wheel is supposed to stop spinning.
But we watch the news, and the target just continues to operate.
Exactly. The energy is expended, but it's like the car doesn't accelerate.
Well, the formal policy is enacted, which represents a massive application of force. But instead of actually halting the target, the force, it warps the existing global infrastructure.
Warps it how, exactly?
So the target country simply bypasses the blockade. They acquire aging oil tankers, disable their public transponders, and basically create a vast, untraceable shadow fleet.
Oh, wow. So they just route around it.
Yeah, they route their resources through like 3 or 4 intermediary countries, repackaging the goods along the way. The physical resources do not stop flowing. The route simply becomes highly convoluted and deeply opaque.
Okay, but let me push back on that just a little bit, because when those major sanctions hit, we often see the target country's currency immediately plummet or their stock market crash.
Right, right.
To the person watching the news, that looks like a very direct intended result, like the policy worked exactly as designed. Are you saying that's just an illusion?
Well, a currency dropping is just a financial metric adjusting within a closed system. I mean, it is a signal on a dashboard. But if we look at the physical reality, the factories, the oil extraction, the actual movement of goods, the engine is still running.
Oh, I see what you mean.
The financial shock is absorbed, and the physical mechanism just shifts into a secondary invisible network. We measure the success of the action by looking at the dashboard, and we completely miss that the actual machinery has just found a different, darker pathway to keep functioning.
Yeah, that dynamic is exactly what we're seeing with the AI investments we mentioned at the start.
Precisely.
The intent is this clean, immediate technological revelation. The capital is authorized, the headlines are written, and the expectation is that society upgrades overnight.
But you cannot just, download a new nuclear power plant or instantly manifest a copper mine.
Right, you can't. The frictionless high-speed capital just collides with the heavy, slow-moving reality of the physical Earth.
Yes, you have algorithms executing trades in fractions of a second, but pouring the concrete for a cooling facility still takes 6 months.
Or securing the permitting for a new transmission line? That can take a decade.
Exactly. The financial velocity hits a physical wall, and the result is not the intended smooth technological rollout, but a severe, uneven distribution of resources.
So if the effort is visibly present, like the money is spent, the policy is signed, where does all that energy actually go? Because, energy doesn't just disappear into the void when a system bottlenecks.
No, it doesn't. And that's where we have to recognize that every action must pass through 2 distinct domains.
Okay, let's get into those.
First, there is the controllable domain. This encompasses the things we can theoretically steer and command from a boardroom or a legislature.
So that's like direct policy decisions, resource allocations, military
Like
orders.
formal institutional mandates. But on the other side, we have the uncontrollable domain.
The messy stuff.
Exactly. The deep, messy currents of human culture, physical logistics, raw geography, the psychological movement of crowds, and frankly, the sheer weight of history.
The things that just refuse to fit neatly into a spreadsheet.
You got it. And at the boundary between those two domains lies what the systems theory papers refer to as the contact surface, or the membrane.
The membrane. I like that visual.
When an action like a rigid policy or a massive investment tries to pass from the controllable domain into the uncontrollable domain, it is never cleanly transmitted. It undergoes a nonlinear transformation.
Okay, wait. So we shouldn't look at these events and say the policy or the investment simply failed.
Precisely. That is the core idea here. Action is not lost. It is transformed.
It's kind of like trying to merge a bullet train onto a residential street.
That is a great way to picture it, actually.
Yeah, because the train doesn't just, smoothly slow down to 30 miles an hour and blend in with the sedans. The sheer momentum of the train rips up the pavement.
Right, the friction destroys the road.
It shatters the windows of the nearby houses. It creates total chaos. The energy of the train is still there, but it has transformed from forward motion into catastrophic heat and friction.
And that mechanism is the core of what we're observing globally. The sheer difference in speed and structure between the high-velocity intent and the slow-moving reality means the action cannot maintain its original shape.
So it's effective, but it's effective elsewhere.
Yes, often in ways we are not measuring. When this action hits the contact surface and isn't smoothly processed, the sources say it results in unrectified differences.
Unrectified differences.
Yep.
Right, in physics, that's essentially an unresolved clash. The energy has nowhere to go in its original form, so it pulls up right at that boundary layer.
Exactly. It generates a silent, invisible buildup of structural tension, which the framework calls heat accumulation.
Heat accumulation, okay.
And alongside this heat, we see profound but unobserved distortions. The source material uses a very specific term for these distortions. They call it silence.
Silence. Wow. That is, it's a haunting way to describe it, honestly.
It really is.
It implies that there are massive structural forces grinding against each other right in front of us. But because they don't produce the specific result we intended, we just ignore them. We aren't tracking the friction. We only track the missing result.
Right, because our observation tools are calibrated exclusively for the intended outcome.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if a policy is meant to lower housing costs and housing costs do not drop, the official report simply states the policy failed.
Ah, right. It doesn't look at the weird side effects.
Exactly. It does not measure the complex new zoning loopholes that developers created in response, or the subtle shifts in how banks process mortgages to offset the new rules. We ignore the silence where the pressure is actually building.
We are obsessively checking the speedometer of the car, getting frustrated that we aren't moving faster, while completely ignoring that the engine is running dangerously hot and the transmission is melting.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And to really visualize how this transformation happens across society, the sources offer a fascinating minimal framework.
Oh, the 3 layers, right.
Yeah. Yes. They organize reality into 3 specific layers that this energy has to travel through. We can observe this through the N, I, and OS layers.
Break those down for me. What's the N layer?
The first is the narrative layer. This is the surface. It consists of the breaking news headlines, the official government announcements, the viral social media trends.
The slogans a society repeats to itself.
Right. It is the story we are officially telling.
And beneath that is the internal layer, the I layer. This is the human element, right?
Exactly. It holds the deep underlying values, the generational memories, the historical fears, and the collective psychological expectations of the public.
And then the third one.
Finally, we have the operational system, the OS layer. This is the rigid, mechanical infrastructure of society.
Okay, so like the physical logistics networks.
Yeah, the logistics, the automated financial clearinghouses, the bureaucratic institutions, and the energy grids. It is the plumbing that actually makes the world run.
So the friction, the heat accumulation we were talking about, happens because these 3 layers operate at fundamentally incompatible speeds.
That's the key.
Let's walk a real-world example through these layers to see how the bullet train hits the residential street. Imagine a massive, sudden national initiative to completely pivot a country's manufacturing supply chain, like
Wow.
pulling everything back domestically within 2 years.
Okay, so in the narrative layer, that change happens almost instantly. A leader holds a press conference, a document is signed, and the headlines declare a new era of domestic production. The story changes overnight.
But then that high-speed narrative hits the operational system layer, and the OS layer is rigid.
Extremely rigid. Building new semiconductor factories, retraining hundreds of thousands of workers, sourcing rare earth metals locally, rewriting complex international trade software. That takes years, sometimes decades.
The plumbing cannot physically adapt to the news story.
Right. The operational system becomes hopelessly clogged, trying to process a command it wasn't built for.
Mhm.
And while the OS is grinding its gears, the tension bleeds into the internal layer.
Of people.
Exactly. The public, living in the I layer, hears the triumphant narrative, but they physically experience the operational breakdown.
Oh, right. So they feel the sudden shortages, the price spikes, the confusion in their industries. The friction is the gap between the ribbon-cutting ceremony and the concrete actually being poured.
Yes, the original action, the desire to change the supply chain, loses its intended shape. It doesn't create instant domestic wealth. Instead, the action transforms into a sudden, inexplicable collective anxiety within the internal layer.
The mismatch in velocity across the contact surfaces essentially guarantees transformation.
It does. I mean, think about a high-frequency trading algorithm operating in the OS layer. It executes 10,000 trades in a second. But human culture, residing in the internal layer, operates on the scale of months and years. When the algorithm's actions ripple out, human culture cannot process the sheer speed of the financial shifts.
The result is rarely a clean economic outcome. It is often a profound sense of disorientation.
Exactly. This means we have to stop looking at the intended purpose of an action and start looking at the speed of the action versus the speed of the domain it is entering.
We should just assume that any major structural mismatch will result in heat, not a clean victory.
Yes, that's the safest assumption.
But, this isn't just about high-level statecraft or global supply chains.
Yeah.
The deep dive gets really grounded when we look at how this invisible friction eventually trickles all the way down to you, the listener.
We call this the living membrane.
The living membrane.
The immense pressure generated upstream by global systems colliding eventually requires an outlet. Because the domains move at varying speeds, the transformed action touches the routines of daily life long before it ever registers as a systemic crisis on the end layer.
Right, so it seeps into your daily logistics, your personal time, and the rhythm of your neighborhood.
Exactly. The unrectified difference, that unresolved clash from halfway across the world, alters the baseline tempo of your life without ever announcing itself formally.
And we can trace the physical traces of this transformation if we adjust our focus, right? The sources provide some really concrete daily signals.
Yes, they are the subtle, real-world inconsistencies that are incredibly easy to dismiss as mere modern annoyances.
Like, think about the last time you went to the local grocery store. You might notice that the prices on the shelves haven't violently spiked this week.
Right, the end layer says inflation is stabilizing.
Exactly. But if you look closely, the frequency of deliveries to that store has been quietly reduced. The shelves aren't bare, but they are shallower. Certain niche brands are missing.
The upstream global pressure did not manifest as a direct, easily measurable price increase. It hit the contact surface of local logistics and transformed into a quiet delay.
Ah, so the store manages the economic friction by holding less inventory and receiving fewer trucks.
Precisely. Or look at how we experience the energy grid. We aren't seeing catastrophic citywide blackouts announced on the evening news.
No, but you might start receiving emails from your utility company about subtle peak hour control measures.
Yes, they offer you a small rebate if they can control your smart thermostat during the hottest part of the day.
Which is wild. The physical infrastructure is straining under the end layer's demand for infinite clean energy and the sheer draw of new technologies.
But instead of the grid violently failing, the heat accumulating in the system alters the legal and technical shape of your energy contract.
The friction becomes a subtle negotiation over your living room temperature.
Exactly. And we see the exact same mechanic in global shipping and your personal packages.
Oh, yeah? Global trade hasn't stopped. Cargo ships are still crossing the ocean.
But the variability of arrival times has widened drastically. A few years ago, you had a 2-day shipping guarantee, and it arrived in exactly 2 days.
Right, and now you get a notification that the package will arrive somewhere between Tuesday and Saturday.
The causal chain is clear, though. A geopolitical policy forces ships to avoid a certain canal. The ships take a longer route around a continent. This creates a backlog at a major port.
And the port backlog disrupts the local trucking schedule.
Yes. By the time that friction reaches you, it looks like a tracking number that hasn't updated in 3 days. The variability itself is the trace of the unseen friction.
It creates this vague, physical feeling of subtle delay throughout society. You can't quite put your finger on a specific catastrophe, but the baseline rhythm of the world feels slightly off-tempo.
Like everything just takes a little more effort, a little more time, a little more patience than it used to.
Yeah, these subtle shifts are really the truest leading indicators of the gap between intent and phenomenon.
The timing variability, the shallow inventory, the shifting contracts, they're the early warning signs of heat accumulation.
Let's return to that concept of silence for a moment, because it beautifully anchors this daily living layer. When a global action is transformed into a 3-day delay on your delivery, is that delay a form of silence?
Structurally, yes, because our institutions do not measure variability of local delivery times or subtle shifts in grocery inventory as major economic crises.
Yeah, those don't make the headlines.
Exactly. These phenomena do not neatly fit into the official metrics of GDP or unemployment. Therefore, they remain completely silent in the official narrative.
Because the end layer only speaks in binary outcomes. It tells us if the market is up or down, if the policy passed or failed.
It never reports on the engine running dangerously hot because there is no official gauge for that specific type of heat.
The end layer insists everything is functioning normally. But the pressure continues to build without public acknowledgement. The operational system continues to blandly push massive amounts of fast-moving capital and policy into severely clogged, slow-moving pathways.
And because that heat cannot simply vanish, it ultimately sinks into the internal layer.
It sinks into the psychology of the public.
Yes. People deeply feel the delays. They feel the subtle friction in their daily commutes, their shopping, their work routines, but they turn on the news and the official narrative tells them the system is perfectly fine.
That profound disconnect creates a quiet, pervasive sense of societal unease.
The unease you feel is the physical sensation of the speed gradient. It is your internal layer reacting viscerally to the mismatch between what you are told is happening and the friction you are physically experiencing.
And stripping away the emotional judgments of right and wrong allows us to clearly see these raw mechanics. I mean, we stop getting angry at the delivery driver or the local store manager.
Exactly. We stop looking for a specific villain to blame for a broken policy.
We calmly observe the structural incompatibility that caused the policy to transform into something else entirely. We shift our entire framework of observation.
We stop asking why an action failed. We simply start mapping where the action went.
Right. We have traced this energy all the way from the grand macro-level intentions of global statecraft and artificial intelligence infrastructure down through the complex narrative, internal, and operational layers.
We watched the bullet train hit the residential street.
Yeah, and we followed the friction all the way down to a slightly delayed package on your front porch and a subtle change in your smart thermostat. But, our role here is to observe, not to jump to neat, comforting conclusions.
We must leave space for the ambiguity of what we still cannot see. The world is heavily populated with these contact surfaces hiding in plain sight.
We are left looking at the systems around us, not for straightforward causes and effects, but for the subtle traces of transformation. So we have to leave you to search for the remaining invisible friction in your own environment.
We have a final series of questions for you to mull over.
Yeah. When you look at your specific field of work or the daily routines of your own life, where's the transformation happening right now?
Which contact surface is bearing the most tension? Is it the boundary between the narrative layer you were told at work, the internal values you actually hold, or the rigid operational systems you are forced to use?
Where is the speed mismatch most obvious to you? And crucially, what unobserved distortions are accumulating as silence in your world, simply because no one knows how to measure them?
Action is not disappearing.
It is being transformed at the contact surface and reappearing elsewhere.